Let's talk about men in the Aquarian Age. As you all know, if you watch my videos, that we are exiting the patriarchal experiment. So the patriarchal experiment lasted around 12,000 years, plus or minus. Okay, and it is a part of the Vedic calendar, which consists of 26,000 years. And within that Vedic calendar, we have what we know as the Golden Age, which is the rise of human consciousness. We also have the decline, moving into the Dark Ages. And during the Dark Ages that we are still in, but we are seeing a subtle increase or incline in human consciousness and maturity. And that was during the patriarchal experiment. And there is evidence of the patriarchal experiment even in ancient Egypt. We know as Akhenaten. He was a pharaoh during the 19th dynasty, and he very much represented this matriarchal or feminine emphasis on esoteric reason, wisdom, focus on community well-being, community happiness, sharing with each other, a focus on the unconscious realms, such as the spiritual realms, the realms of art, of poetry, everything of the heart, everything of creativity that is gentle, that is soothing, such as practicing of healing modalities. These kinds of things represents the matriarchal part of all of us, even individual. But that didn't last, because that really showcases the last, I'm gonna say like the last real, it was very quick, okay, it was about like 40 years, okay, that really just, it was the last real matriarchal leadership that we had before we really went heavy into the patriarchal experiment, which we know the patriarchal, even if we look at ancient Egyptian pharaohs, there's an emphasis on being very rigid, okay, which is being very unflexible, being very solid, being very stern, very much about control, about domination. So when we think of Akhenaten, and you know, his queen Nefertiti, we think of very friendly, very open, very flexible, very dynamic, well-rounded, very much like a spherical energy. But when we think of the masculine pharaohs, okay, we before that and after that is just very much very flat. Okay, very, very flat. So that really set up for the many generations of really pressuring the human model to be very flat, be very rigid, a focus on control, focus on domination, a focus on the hierarchic scale, which is like division between people, because the masculine also represents polarities. Okay, it represents opposites, it represents dualities. Okay, so when we place big barriers between them, we enclose energy. And the matriarch is very much about opening energy. So we basically have been pressured through many generations of this flat sort of, you know, this flat leadership. We've been basically molded into a flat person, okay, where we're very rigid, we are inflexible, we are deep in our polarities, deep in our opposites, deep in our dualities, where we have big barriers, like registers, okay, as you could see, like in the hierarchic scale, where we have registers, like you're this and you're this, you're that, you're that, you're that, you're that. So there was really no flexibility, there was really no mobility, and that's what caused a lot of what we know as revolution. Revolution is revolving door. So we know when we think about, you know, hierarchy as like this pyramid, it's revolving. Okay, so Flat is very much about you're this, that's that. Okay? Revolving is a doorway. Okay? It's not enclosed, it's a doorway opening into other potentials. So the matriarch very much represents the communion, where polarities and opposites and dualities that represent the masculine part of ourselves, or the right side of our body, we could say, it's kind of spinning off in that sort of practice of self. That's where really a doorway's open, where we see crosses of angular energy. So spherical energy is about angular energy. Yoga is about angular energy. Yoga is also about, we could say, paper folding. Okay, and paper folding is about angles. So when we're flat, we're very much a flat paper. We're very two-dimensional. You're this, you're that. There's really no mobility. There's no changeability. There's no revolving. Okay, revolution. You're revolving through seasons of movement, okay? But we think of origami or paper folding very much as the matriarch, where your two-dimensional paper becomes a five-dimensional origami shape that is flexible enough and knowledgeable enough in its bending of itself, angles of self, to take new shapes. So this is about Adonakten very much showcased this, and Hatshepsut, I don't know if I pronounced that name right, which was a pharaoh, female pharaoh, we say down the 18th dynasty, I believe, and she very much represented, very similar to Adonakten, about the matriarch, okay, which is focused on nature, focused on well-being, very much focused on humanitarianism, focused on environmentalism, focused on art, on poetry, on creativity, on sharing, on learning and listening and discovering and innovation, these kinds of things, okay? It's really very much about revolutionizing the flat person, because we're not flat Stanley. We are well-rounded. We are dimensional, and that's that matriarch. So kind of coming in out of the patriarchal experiment, where we've, have many things that we went through, from pharaohs to kings to more kings and to more kings and to presidents and all these kinds of things. The man, okay, is very, very flat. Okay, it's like all the man really has is this dominance and control. That makes you really rigid. If that's all you have in your toolkit is just some sort of understanding on dominance and control, then you really don't know what to do. Okay? So, and that's kind of what's happening right now. So the Aquarian Age is really marking where we are moving away from these dark ages, and we're beginning to move into these lighter ages, which is going to be led by a matriarchal model. So that's why we're seeing this rise in like this Adonakten breed of people. So if you look at Adonakten, you look at Nefertiti, and you look at the art of their time, their period is very much similar to what's going on, where there's talk of like aliens, there's talk of esoteric wisdom, interdimensional space, talk about there's an emphasis on science becoming almost introducing of like spiritual science, okay? And this is really showcasing this matriarchal rise within us. And the men that are very much set in that flat person, they have no idea what to do, because they can't bend. They can't make new shapes, because to be origami shapes moving, like revolutionizing yourself, is implying that you are an open door. An open door is potential, but reaching more potential. But if you don't have an open door, what happens? You have dominance and you have control, but you really don't know how to revolve yourself through yourself, to learn yourself, and to empower yourself to reach a new potential. So you get very much rigid and you're set. Like you're set in this life, you're set in this mold, you're set in this attitude, you're set in this belief about yourself, you're set in this culture, this whatever. And since you can't revolve around yourself to get over yourself, to move past yourself, you're basically you're settling in yourself, settling in that self. So when we think about men, I've seen out there in this world that men just don't know what to do. So with their enclosed energy, they're like, I'm just not gonna, I'm just not gonna take responsibility because a lot about dominance and about control is presenting a false sense of responsibility. Okay, responsibility for the matriarch is very much about community, health, and well-being. So exiting out of the patriarchal experiment and seeing all of this self-oppression, self-denial, self-neglect, self-hatred, self-judgment really showed that our responsibility as the man, you can talk about the king, and was a false sense of responsibility. Okay. It was a responsibility to basically feed domination and control. But that domination and control, as we were feeding that, we really never learned what it means to revolutionize, what it means to be a leader as a king or as a pharaoh, as, all these, these patriarchal sort of models we see. So entering into the Aquarian Age, who's taking responsibility for this self-oppression, self-neglect, self-denial, self-hatred, self-judgment that's breeding all of this settled energy that's leading to disease and leading to mental illness and leading to stagnation, and that's leading into all kinds of just wanky stuff, like uncleansed, dirty stuff. When energy settles, it's very easy for energy to get swampy, to get sluggish, to get dirty. When it just settles, we all know that. It's like kind of like the swamp. It gets kind of sticky, icky, and gooey. So who's taking responsibility for that? It's not domination, it's not control, because that is what really led to this settling of energy we have in our enclosed spaces within our body that we don't know how to move. It's the women. We're the ones taking responsibility. And it's evident we see, where is the energy? You're not going to find it a lot of times in, these Tom, Dick, and Harry's men. Or you're going to see it in yoga practitioners, meditators. You're seeing it in the health and wellness industry. That is where the majority of a lot of high moving energy is at. Okay, so there's a lot of energy there and really the foundation of it is women, because a lot of this health and wellness industry is based on healing modalities, such as herbalism, such as like holistic, practices. And that is very much teachings that have been carried from generation to generation within the woman. Okay, we think of herbalism. That's very much about the woman, because herbalism implies listening, sharing, learning your elements. Now, the patriarchal domination and control was not about learning the elements, was not about going out there and really researching and really being present with plants. It was not about that at all. It was not about learning. It was not really about sharing or listening to, kind of the trees and the bees and the oceans and all that kinds of stuff. It was very much a direct build this, build that, to show that I am God. Okay, so very, very flat. God is this building, but God has no depth. So God becomes quite shallow, okay, because God is this building you worship or worship yourself, but there's no depth because you're not dynamic, you're not dimensional, you're enclosed. You're rigid, and that is not what we call depth of experience, depth of knowledge. So when we don't have depth, and basically we fall short every time, because whatever does not have depth and whatever's like a false responsibility, it always it has no longevity. It just kind of, it falls short. So the women are representing, they are as we can see, even like Lady Liberty, we can see, and the lady in the holding the scales of justice is very much about having the depth through herbalism, through healing modalities that have been shared, that have been practiced, that have been devoted to for so many years, like hidden, we call it like witches or whatnot. But that is the foundation for what we have, this health and wellness. But a lot of men, even we have corporations, institutions, either it's a corporation such as Fruit Loops or corporations such as get your McDonald's, which is really patriarchal. It's about domination. I don't really care if it's healthy for you. I don't care if it's really good for you, but I want to dominate because I need that building or that statue of myself that I'm God. But I'm so shallow because I have no idea about really any sort of elements. I have no patience, I have no presence with any of the elements, the oceans, the bees, the trees. I have no clue, but I'm God. But there's no glow. So what's happening is like these patriarchals are really pushing for, like, now we're seeing the Fruit Loop. Welcome to healthy Fruit Loop. And that's what we're going to see in consumerism when this patriarchal age still needs to be fed. It still wants to be fed. Okay, these corporations still want to dominate, such as Fruit Loops, such as McDonald's kind of thing. But since we're having such a rise in this matriarchal health and wellness, this is very much herbalism, focused on, you can say, holistic practices, such as yoga, such as Kundalini yoga as a form of remedying like mental illness, mental health. Okay, so basically, the millennials, they are basically becoming a model more so of a matriarchal emphasis. So these patriarchal kind of old model is slowly being drained or dulled out of the system as these millennials begin to practice like this Adanaktan breed, which is about being very much sharing, okay, being expressive, being creative, being poetic, being artistic, being spherical, being well-rounded, being dynamic, being emotional, being spiritual, being sensual, very depth, very wide, very much height, range, everything. That's these millennials. They're wanting to be that because they understand that is going to give them energy. This rigid, enclosed, duality, opposites thing that has no rotation, it's not revolving, it's just going to lead to a settling of energy where energy gets dirty, leaky, ooey, sticky, like a swamp. And that is, the millennials are like, they see their parents, they see society like, oh no thank you, I'm not going to be an emotional, it's settling, my emotions become like a dirty swamp. No thank you. My intellect, dementia, no thank you. I'm not going to let my mind become a settled, dirty swamp for dementia to just breed in my mind. So these millennials are flocking to the health and wellness industry because they know that is intuitively the future. And the patriarchal future in their head and their rigid structure, the future is, we gotta leave the planet. And that's when you're so flat. You can talk about a flat person, a static person. You're just kind of, you're not well-rounded enough, you're not spherical enough to actually revolve around yourself, revolve around the problem, to see a new perspective, to see a new perception that gets you to open a new door to a new potential. Men who are flat, such as patriarchal and all of us, you cannot revolve, you cannot origami yourself, angular yourself to see a new potential, because you're bound to this potential that you've been walking and it's out of date. So that's why we do yoga, is a form of, we're always inviting new potentials. We're always seeing ourselves from a different window, from a different door, because that's what gives us height. That is what gives us depth. That's what gives us range. That's what gives us this well-roundedness of what we're looking at. So we're never looking at something from the same window, the same position, the same angle, because we get what? We get rigid. And potential is not rigid, it's revolutionizing. So men, you could see this kind of, you can see like almost like this division sort of going on. In the health and wellness industry, you see women, even it's men, can be men, yoga teachers as men, or, you know, healers as men, but it's very much matriarchal, okay, model. And you're seeing that there is this future of naturalist society, such as the solar panels, such as the wind energy, of renewable energy for the planet. But when you see this patriarchal future model, it's very much about disease and decay, and let's go to Mars, and let's go to planet number 2. And, you know, it's very dark and gloomy, because the patriarchal, it's dulling out. There is really no flexibility in the patriarchal mold of these dark ages to really reach a new potential and to resolve, which is revolving. Resolve is revolutionizing. You're revolving around your past, around your future, around your feminine, around your masculine, to get the window you need to look through to change your thought patterns or to change your attitude. Okay, so with men, a lot of the responsibility is on the woman, and has been all the time, because women, if we get weak, the generation becomes a dud. It becomes a rotten generation, and we've had that in throughout time on this planet. You know, we've so many years, you know, we've been here for a long time. So women know instinctually it's up to them. They have to keep it together, because they decide the generation, not the men. So while, you know, men can, you know, do all kinds of wanky stuff, the women are the ones that really have the strength within themselves, because they know if they fall short, then the whole generation of, you know, their offspring, their children, basically they fall short. They fall short, probably much shorter than how they fell, much shorter. So what we're seeing is a lot of these men, this, you know, patriarchal mold, as it's dulling out, men are dulling with it. So instead of men using their own intuition to recognize, okay, this sort of domination, this sort of control, this building of my ego, look at my 10 cars, it's not working. And they're like, what? It's not working. Like, people are like, what? It's not working. Because that's not the game anymore. And these men, you're seeing they're fighting for it. Look at me, look at my car, I have 10 more, look, I have 20 more, look, come on, see my building, see my ego, see. But they're dull. These men are dull because they're dulling out. Whatever sort of model they're in is not working. They're dulling with the model that's dulling out of humanity. Okay, so it's like choose what game you want to play, because there are two games going on. This game of, you know, eating your Fruit Loops, or, you know, your McDonald's, and, you know, kind of participating in this false sense of responsibility, this false sense of integrity, and that kind of leads into your sort of your dulling, your dimming, your dulling. Okay, slowly, gradually until you're 50 and you're just like a total flat person with no depth, like a shallow statue to stare at yourself. like an empty statue, okay? Or you can recognize that there's something going on. There's something going on, and go where the energy is, where the height, where the depth is, and that's this health and wellness industry. Now, this health and wellness industry is what we call really being, it's emphasized on this planet at this time because it's the open door. So this door is closed, or closing, this door of this old model, this patriarchal experiment, it's closing. And a lot of corporations, we talk about consumerism just in general, either it's pharmaceutical companies, which is very much about consumerism, pharma, whatever it is, the door is closing on that sort of model of just dominating without any integrity or without really any responsibility to the health and wellness of the people. That door is closing because it's not working. It never really worked. Okay, it never really brought joy to the community. It never really brought balance. Okay, it never brought a mediation to the dualities and polarities of this planet. So with this new door opening, this potential that we are revolving ourselves into and through, is very much about bringing a sense of integrity into the generation, the millennials particularly. Okay, integrity, what it means to be healthy, integrity, what it means to be learning and to listen and to share and to express and to be creative and to be a mature human being. That's we're bringing integrity back into ourselves, okay? And that's what's bringing us into what we call the matriarchal of Aranaktan, or the matriarchal of Hatshepsut, which is very much about being a human who's good at being a human, or it's a well-trained, it's a well-practiced experience. It's a masterful experience. It's experience with so many layers that have been explored and discovered. So what we're seeing in a lot of these men, and even what we have going on, and even schools and work, and it's like the mayhem, is that we've gotten so used to not really being responsible. We've gotten so used to being dominated or being controlled and basically oppressing ourselves and neglecting and denying and hating and judging ourselves and other people, that now we're being pressured by the Aquarian Age to rise up and take responsibility, okay, to be sovereign again. But we're so in our genetic code, so oppressed. So now the men particularly are so overwhelmed by this newfound sense of freedom that they really never had. And it's like when you're so used to being oppressed and neglected and denied and judged and hated and all that kind of stuff, you're so used to just being enclosed, to being rigid, to being tight, to being a flat person. Now all of a sudden, as men and women, you are being pressured and basically, it's an evolutionary necessity to basically take responsibility for your spiritual energy, for your sexual energy, for your sensual energy, for your emotional energy, for your intellectual energy, so you can become spherical again. But when we're so used to just being so rigid, it's like, oh my god, I don't want to do that. Like, that's just too much work. Like, I just want to be this person, my statue, and that's that. I don't want to be community. I don't want to focus on sharing, expressing, and being creative, and cleaning myself up, and, bathing. I don't want to focus on that. I just want to focus on, like, my 10 cars. Because, my 10 cars, it showcases how much domination, how much control I have over, whatever sort of field I'm trying to control. But that's not the game, because that game, it has to reach an end for basically this planet to receive what we call a restorative balance. So when we see, hundreds of men with these, each have 10 cars. We see thousands of men with these 10 cars, but they're looking dull, as very dull. It's like, yep, that's not working. So for women, I'm just gonna say this because I'm running out of juice on my phone. What really is going to really, like these men, evolutionary necessity, it's not a choice, the plant you have to, is women, we hold the generation, we hold even what men will do and what men are allowed to do, what is accepted for men to do and what is not. We hold the discernment in a relationship. So as women, if we just allow these Tom, Dick, and Harrys to reenact their pornographic fantasy on us, then we're accepting it for a whole generation of men to do that to their women. Okay, now in the past, as women, we were part of the domination. We were dominated and controlled. That's kind of the thing. But now, since we're unlocking all of this freedom because of the Aquarian Age and this matriarchal rise in ourselves, and this revolution, okay, this revolving door, basically as women, we have the freedom to remodel and reinvent the generation according to what we want, not what men want, what we want. And that is something we didn't have as women for a long time. So what that means is, if we don't want some Tom, Dick, and Harry up in our space with his cigarettes and his alcohol, or his bad attitude, or his pornographic sex and his dirty intellect, dud intellect, or his emotional kind of mess, we just say no and say no and say no. And what's going to happen is we're saying no to a whole generation of men doing that. And basically what's going to happen is those men are going to realize, I have to evolve, I have to mature, I have to bend to what these women want. Because as a man, I need a matriarch, because it's just my basic sort of primitive self. When it comes to birds, when it comes to elephants, when it comes to whales, men are drawn to women because men, they need that aura of a woman to actually mature and find their purpose in life. Either it's the mother, matriarch, or grandmother, either it's a female friend, either it's a lover. Men know that a woman has the aura or has the psyche that or the arc line a man needs. So women hold the aura of the wisdom, the purpose, the reason, the understanding, the maturity that a man needs, or he's just going to fall short into what we call dud or rotten men. And the men know this. That's why they're sniffing, the pheromones of the right woman. When they see something in the woman's aura, they're like, oh yes. But if that man is not rising up if he is not taking responsibility for sexual energies, emotional energy, intellectual energy, creative energy, his home life, his, overall, his spherical energy, because he's not flat, nobody's flat, then you have the discernment. So, and when we say I'm fooled by these men, it was more so I fooled myself because I didn't listen to my intuition. As a woman, I knew there was something off. I knew this flat person was not responsible. I could just tell he was just not taking ownership. And if a man is not taking ownership or responsibility, that's a huge sign that he's not, he's overwhelmed. And as a woman, you do not want a man who's really overwhelmed. Because right now, the Aquarian Age is all about, we're doing it. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep energizing, keep energizing, keep energizing, keep revolving, keep folding to see how many origami shapes you can take. You got to keep it going. Okay, master all of as many things as you possibly can. And that is velocity. And that is a woman's sort of journey right now. And if the man is overwhelmed by that, which a lot of men are, okay, they, within themselves, have to make the decision, what kind of game are they playing? Are they playing the false sort of responsibility game that leads to their total like dullness, where they're just like this kind of swamp of energy? Or are they going to play the game of getting integrity back and bending, curving, and revolving with the revolutionizing times? And as a woman, we can decide that for a whole generation. We can decide what is allowed in relationships between men and women and what is not. So, and that is kind of the secret. You talk about the secret within the patriarchal age that was very much kept from women. You know, whoever rules the sex is really the leader of the world. And that is female. We've always been the ones that were the leader, the rulers. We talk about the rulers of sex. And sex is not just a physical act, it's a sex of creation. Sex holds who decides the generation, who decides the model for the next generation. And if the patriarchal wants the model to be a certain way, they know they have to mold women into that. They have to make women basically obey to what the man wants for the next generation, because they know it's not the man who decides, it's the woman. Okay, she decides it. So, and that's sex. So whoever decides kind of who holds the sex, it gets to decide the whole generation and kind of the model for the generation. So that was kind of kept from women, and men were basically kind of, you know, telling women kind of what they wanted from their offspring, and women were like, okay, you know, here's my sex, just give it to you, and, you know. But now we're realizing that it's a lot more sacred, has a lot more significance than what we have been basically told. So the significance is we get to decide the generation. Okay. We get to decide what is allowed and what is not allowed. Okay. That's the discernment of the woman, not the man. It's the discernment of the woman. So keep that in mind, women, when you are kind of participating in sort of relationships, because the game is integrity. That's responsibility. False responsibility is no integrity for yourself. It's a swamp of energy. What is a swamp of energy? It's your energy settling because you're not really taking ownership of your spiritual energy, your emotional energy, your sexual energy, your sensual energy, because you just don't have really, for men, just you're overwhelmed. You're just so overwhelmed that you're just like, and then what happens when you kind of just like sluggishly just sit around and just smoke pot or you drink whatever, is you lose time, you lose momentum that you need to actually, instead of get overwhelmed, to get on board, to get with the program, to get like a practice, a ritual of getting acquainted with revolutionizing yourself, so that you're not on that game of total dull into dementia, but the game of total, you know, rising into your ability to get a handle on how dynamic and how well-rounded you are. And that's the challenge for men, to be flat to all of a sudden origami shapes. That's the challenge. But women, we hold what's going to be the new generation. And the new generation is going to be children that know how to do many, many origami shapes, because that's problem solvers. Flat paper is not problem solvers. Ability to make that paper into as many shapes as possible is problem solvers. And that's what this planet is yearning for at this time. So if men want to be on that kind of a portal, then they have no choice. It's evolution necessity for them to take their flat paper that they're so used to, and with all their drawings of their 10 cars, and to bend it, revolve it, fold it. Because that is the integrity of the responsibility. Or just, you know, doll into your sort of, yeah. So I'm going to leave you guys with this. And namaste.